You watch competitors seize opportunities while you're still planning your next move, missing crucial moments that could transform your entire trajectory. Every day you see others advance their positions through timing and preparation, while you remain reactive instead of proactive, always one step behind the leaders who seem to anticipate every shift in the landscape. I am Napoleon Bonaparte, the emperor who conquered most of Europe not through superior numbers, but by winning battles before they ever began. My greatest victories came from understanding that the art of war is won in the mind and through meticulous preparation, long before armies ever meet on the battlefield. What I discovered about winning before the battle begins will transform how you approach every challenge, opportunity, and competition in your life. The strategic principles I'll share will give you the ability to position yourself for victory while others are still trying to understand the game. Whether you're building empires or building careers, the fundamentals of winning through preparation and strategic thinking remain as powerful today as they were when I reshaped the map of Europe. But first, like this video, subscribe for more imperial wisdom and comment below where you're watching from. I want to know which corner of the world is ready to master the art of winning before the battle begins. I was born into a world that didn't want me. Corsica had just been sold to France by the Genoese, and my family found ourselves caught between two worlds, no longer Italian, not yet truly French. When I arrived at the Royal Military School in Brienne at age 9, I carried with me a compass that my father had given me, not just for navigation, but as a symbol of finding direction when everything around you is uncertain. The other students mocked my accent, my background, my island heritage. They called me the Corsican upstart and made it clear that I would always be an outsider in their privileged French military society. But in those moments of isolation and humiliation, I learned my first great lesson about winning before the battle begins. When you cannot rely on natural advantages, you must create them through superior preparation. While my classmates played and socialized, I studied. I devoured every military history I could find, Caesar's campaigns, Alexander's conquests, Frederick the Great's tactical innovations. I learned that every great victory in history began not with the first sword thrust, but with the last detail of preparation. When they slept, I read by candlelight. When they boasted about their family connections, I memorized topographical maps. My compass became my constant companion, not just for military exercises, but as a reminder that in any situation, no matter how hostile or unfamiliar, there is always a way forward if you prepare thoroughly enough to find it. I would spend hours studying the terrain around our school, understanding every hill, every valley, every potential advantage the landscape might offer. The moment that changed everything came during a military exercise in my second year. Our instructors had designed a complex tactical problem that was meant to be nearly impossible for students our age. While my classmates immediately began discussing which routes to take and which formations to use, I spent the entire first day just walking the terrain, studying it with my compass, understanding every fold in the ground. When the exercise began, my team executed a flanking maneuver that no one had anticipated because I had discovered a hidden ravine that allowed us to approach the objective unseen. We achieved total victory not through superior numbers or better equipment, but because I had prepared more thoroughly than anyone else thought necessary. That night, as my fellow students grudgingly acknowledged my success, I realized something profound. Preparation is the great equalizer. It doesn't matter if you're born into privilege or poverty, if you're an insider or an outsider. Thorough preparation can overcome almost any natural disadvantage. This lesson would guide me through every stage of my rise. When I graduated from military academy and became a second lieutenant in the artillery, I didn't just learn to fire cannons. I studied the mathematics of trajectory, the chemistry of gunpowder, the psychology of men under fire. When others saw routine training, I saw opportunities to gain microscopic advantages that would compound over time. My compass still sits on my desk as I write this, a reminder that no matter how lost or disadvantaged you might feel, preparation can always show you the way forward. Artifact: the Grande Armée Intelligence Network Map, a detailed map showing Napoleon's extensive spy network across Europe. By the time I commanded the Grande Armée, I possessed the most sophisticated intelligence network Europe had ever seen. Spread across my desk was a map that showed not enemy positions, but something far more valuable: the locations of my spies, informants, and intelligence operatives throughout every major capital from Vienna to St. Petersburg. This network became my greatest weapon because I learned early that information is the ultimate form of preparation. Most generals prepare for battle by drilling their troops and sharpening their swords. I prepared by knowing everything possible about my enemies before they knew I was watching them. When I faced the Austrian and Russian armies at Austerlitz in 1805, I didn't just know their numbers and positions. I knew their commanders' personalities, their army's morale, their supply situations, and most importantly, their plans. My intelligence network began as a necessity born from being perpetually outnumbered. When I took command of the Army of Italy in 1796, I was 26 years old, commanding forces that were demoralized, undersupplied, and facing enemies with superior numbers. Traditional military wisdom said I should retreat and wait for reinforcements. Instead, I invested every available franc in building an information network. I recruited local merchants who traveled freely between enemy camps, priests who heard confessions from Austrian officers, even washerwomen who cleaned the uniforms and could report on troop movements. I learned that information flows through society like water. You just need to know where to position your buckets to catch it. The breakthrough came when one of my agents, a seemingly innocent wine merchant named Giuseppe, brought me detailed plans of the Austrian defensive positions. But more valuable than their positions was learning about the personality clash between their two commanders. I discovered that General Beaulieu and General Argenteau despised each other and barely communicated. This single piece of intelligence allowed me to design a strategy that exploited their lack of coordination. At the Battle of Lodi, I didn't defeat the Austrians through superior firepower. I defeated them because I knew exactly when and where they would be weakest. My spies had informed me that their troops would be crossing the Adda River at a specific time, tired from a forced march and expecting no resistance. I positioned my artillery to arrive at that precise moment, turning what should have been an organized retreat into a rout. This victory taught me that information supremacy creates what I call prepared opportunities, moments when you can achieve maximum impact with minimum effort because you understand the situation completely while your opponents operate in darkness. I expanded this principle throughout my career. Before the Austerlitz campaign, my agents spent months studying not just enemy military preparations, but the political tensions between Austria and Russia. I learned that Tsar Alexander was young, impetuous, and eager to prove himself against me. I used this knowledge to create a trap. I deliberately appeared weaker than I was, encouraging the Allies to attack me on ground of my choosing at a time when I was fully prepared and they were overextended. The map on my desk shows hundreds of information sources, but the real power wasn't in any single piece of intelligence. It was in the systematic approach to gathering, analyzing, and acting on information before my enemies even realized what information I needed. While they prepared their armies, I prepared my understanding. While they sharpened their weapons, I sharpened my insights into their weaknesses, fears, and intentions. This principle applies far beyond military campaigns. In any competitive situation, whether business, politics, or personal advancement, the person who understands the landscape most completely before taking action holds an almost insurmountable advantage. Information supremacy means winning before the battle begins, because you fight with perfect knowledge while your opponents fight blind. Artifact, Battle of Austerlitz. Topographical plans, detailed terrain maps showing how geography was used to create tactical advantages. The night before Austerlitz, while my enemies slept in confidence of their superior numbers, I walked the battlefield alone with my topographical plan spread before me by candlelight. These maps, marked with every elevation change, every frozen pond, every ridge and valley, would determine the fate of Europe. Most commanders see terrain as a backdrop to battle. I learned to see it as a participant that could be recruited to fight on my side. My obsession with geography began during those lonely nights at military academy when I studied every great battle in history. I noticed that victorious generals didn't just know how to move men, they knew how to make the earth itself an ally. Alexander used the river at Gaugamela to protect his flank. Caesar used the siege walls at Alesia to trap his enemies. I realized that terrain preparation was perhaps the most overlooked aspect of winning before the battle begins. Before every major campaign, I personally surveyed the likely battlefields, not from horseback, not through reports from subordinates, but on foot with measuring instruments, understanding exactly how the land would behave under the stress of thousands of men, horses, and cannons. I learned that a 2-degree slope that seems insignificant to the eye becomes a decisive advantage when cavalry charges up it. A seemingly solid field becomes a muddy trap after autumn rains. For Austerlitz, I had been studying the Pratzen Heights for months through agents and reconnaissance. I knew that in December the morning mist would rise from the frozen ponds and valleys, creating natural concealment. I knew the exact angle of winter sunlight would blind enemies positioned on the heights if they faced east. Most importantly, I knew that the ground that appeared to offer the commanding position would actually become a trap for anyone occupying it when attacked from multiple directions. The Allied commanders, the Austrian General Weyrother and Tsar Alexander, saw the Pratzen Heights and immediately wanted to occupy them because they appeared to offer the obvious tactical advantage. This is exactly what I wanted them to think. My preparation had revealed that while the heights offered excellent visibility, they also created a communications nightmare. Troops positioned there couldn't easily support each other or retreat quickly if the situation changed. I deliberately weakened my right flank and positioned my forces to appear vulnerable, essentially offering the Allies the bait of the commanding terrain. While they spent precious time maneuvering to occupy what they thought was the strongest position, I was positioning my reserves where I knew the decisive action would actually occur, not on the heights themselves, but in the valleys where their overextended forces would be most vulnerable. When the battle began, everything unfolded exactly as my terrain analysis had predicted. The Allied forces, thinking they held the advantage of position, found themselves separated by the very geography they thought they controlled. The morning mist I had anticipated provided perfect concealment for my flanking movements. The frozen ponds I had marked on my maps became death traps when my artillery fire cracked the ice beneath retreating enemy troops. The genius wasn't in my tactical movements during the battle. It was in the months of geographical preparation that made those movements inevitable. I had turned the battlefield into a stage where only one drama could unfold, and I had written the script. This principle extends far beyond military applications. In business, understanding the competitive landscape, the terrain of market conditions, regulatory environment, customer behavior patterns, allows you to position yourself where success becomes almost inevitable. In personal advancement, understanding the geography of your organization, industry, or social environment lets you maneuver toward opportunities while others stumble blindly. The key insight from my topographical plans is that preparation means understanding not just what you want to do, but understanding the environment so thoroughly that you can predict exactly how others will react to it. When you control the terrain, literal or metaphorical, you control the battle before it begins. Artifact: Napoleon's personal campaign journal his private notes revealing mental preparation techniques and psychological strategies. In my private campaign journal, which I kept hidden from even my closest marshals, I wrote detailed analyses not of enemy positions or supply lines, but of something far more critical, the psychology of victory. The pages reveal my most intimate thoughts about mental preparation, the internal work that must be completed long before any external battle begins. Most leaders prepare their armies. I learned that the decisive battle is always fought first, in the mind of the commander. The entry I'm most proud of was written the night before my coronation as emperor. While Paris celebrated and my generals planned ceremonies, I sat alone, wrestling with a profound realization: the greatest enemy I would ever face wasn't Austria, Russia, or Britain. It was my own doubt. That night I developed what I call the visualization of inevitability, a mental discipline that would carry me through every subsequent campaign. I began this practice during my early artillery days, when I was still unknown and untested. Before every engagement, no matter how small, I would spend hours in complete solitude, mentally rehearsing not just the tactical movements, but the entire sensory experience of victory. I would visualize the exact moment when enemy resistance would break. Imagine the sound of their retreat. Feel the satisfaction of achieving the objective exactly as planned. This wasn't mere wishful thinking. It was systematic psychological preparation. I would visualize every possible scenario, including setbacks and unexpected developments, and mentally rehearse my responses to each. By the time I entered actual combat, my mind had already experienced victory dozens of times. The physical battle became merely the execution of a mental rehearsal I had perfected. My journal reveals the specific techniques I developed to overcome what I call command paralysis, the overwhelming doubt that strikes every leader when facing seemingly impossible odds. During the Italian campaigns, when I was outnumbered 3-1 and my own officers questioned my strategies, I would write detailed entries imagining the campaign from the perspective of future historians. I would literally write my own victory dispatches before the battles occurred. This mental preparation served a dual purpose. First, it forced me to think through every detail of how victory could be achieved, identifying potential problems and solutions in advance. Second, it created what I call psychological inevitability, a mental state where success feels so real and thoroughly planned that doubt becomes impossible. The most powerful example was before my Egyptian campaign. My journal from that period shows pages of mental preparation for leading men across impossible desert conditions, facing an unknown enemy in an alien environment. I spent weeks visualizing not just military victories, but the psychological challenge of maintaining morale when everything familiar was stripped away. I mentally rehearsed speeches I would give to my troops, imagined their reactions to setbacks, and prepared psychological responses to every possible crisis of confidence. When we actually landed in Egypt and faced the psychological shock of the desert environment, my mental preparation allowed me to project absolute confidence because I had already lived through these challenges in my mind. My soldiers' morale remained strong not because the conditions were easy, but because their commander displayed no uncertainty about ultimate success. The journal also reveals my method for dealing with fear, what I call the democracy of terror. I wrote extensively about how fear affects everyone, from the lowest soldier to the commanding general. The difference between leaders and followers isn't the absence of fear, but the preparation to act decisively despite it. I would spend time each night writing about my fears in detail, analyzing them logically, and then mentally rehearsing confident action in spite of them. My most important psychological insight, documented across hundreds of journal entries, is that confidence is not a feeling, it's a skill developed through mental preparation. True confidence comes from having thought through every possible scenario so thoroughly that you know you can adapt to whatever actually occurs. The final page of my campaign journal before Waterloo contains perhaps my most honest psychological assessment. I have prepared my mind for every possible outcome except surrender, because a mind that truly prepares for victory cannot conceive of defeat as an acceptable option. This psychological preparation made the difference between reactive leadership and proactive command. When you have mentally rehearsed success so thoroughly that it feels inevitable, you make decisions with a clarity and speed that overwhelms opponents who are still wrestling with uncertainty. Artifact? The Imperial Guard's Forced March Orders. Documents showing Napoleon's revolutionary rapid deployment strategies. The orders I issued to my Imperial Guard before the Ulm campaign contain what my marshals called impossible demands. March 25 miles per day for 12 consecutive days, arrive battle-ready, and be prepared to engage immediately upon arrival. These documents, stained with mud and marked with the urgency of my own handwriting, represent my discovery that speed itself is a weapon more powerful than any cannon. I learned the velocity principle during my first independent command in Italy, when I realized that my greatest advantage wasn't superior numbers or better equipment. It was the ability to appear where my enemies least expected me, faster than they believed possible. While Austrian generals moved their armies like chess pieces, deliberating each move for days, I moved mine like lightning, striking before they could react. The secret wasn't just marching faster, it was preparing faster. While my enemies spent weeks planning their next move, I had already prepared for multiple contingencies and could execute immediately when opportunities arose. My staff officers became masters of what I call preparation velocity, the ability to have complete battle plans ready for execution within hours rather than days. During the 1805 campaign against Austria, I faced a seemingly impossible situation. The Austrian army under General Mack was positioned at Ulm with superior numbers, while Russian reinforcements under Kutuzov were marching west to join them. Traditional military wisdom demanded that I either retreat or wait for my own reinforcements. Instead, I chose to use speed as my primary weapon. My forced march orders weren't just about moving troops quickly, they were about moving prepared troops quickly. Every regiment had been equipped with predetermined supplies for exactly this type of rapid deployment. Every officer carried contingency plans for various scenarios we might encounter. Every soldier knew his role, not just in the eventual battle, but in the rapid movement that would make victory possible. We covered over 300 miles in 12 days, arriving at Ulm before the Austrians realized we had left our previous positions. But the real genius wasn't the speed of our movement. It was that we arrived completely prepared for immediate action. While General Mack was still trying to understand how we had appeared behind his positions, we were already executing a battle plan I had prepared weeks earlier. The psychological impact of this velocity was devastating to enemy morale. When armies appear faster than seems humanly possible, enemies begin to believe they're facing supernatural forces. At Ulm, Austrian officers surrendered not because they couldn't fight, but because they couldn't comprehend how they had been outmaneuvered so completely. Speed had become a form of psychological warfare. I applied this velocity principle beyond troop movements to every aspect of military operations. My artillery could be repositioned and ready to fire in half the time required by enemy batteries, because we had prepared standard positioning procedures. My supply trains moved at unprecedented speeds because we had pre-positioned depots and predetermined routes. My communications moved faster because I had established relay systems with prepared messages for common situations. The Battle of Jena-Auerstedt demonstrated velocity preparation at its peak. When Prussian forces finally decided to engage me, I had already moved my scattered corps into position for a coordinated attack faster than they thought possible. The Prussians had prepared for a traditional campaign of gradual movements and deliberate engagements. Instead, they faced an enemy that had prepared for rapid concentration and immediate decisive action. My forced march orders revealed the infrastructure required for strategic speed, pre-positioned supplies, predetermined routes, standardized procedures, and most importantly, mental preparation for rapid decision-making. Speed without preparation is chaos. Preparation without speed is paralysis. The combination creates what I call inevitable momentum, the ability to create and exploit opportunities faster than opponents can respond. This principle transforms every competitive situation. In business, the company that can identify, prepare for, and execute opportunities fastest dominates markets regardless of size. In personal advancement, the individual who can prepare quickly and act decisively seizes opportunities while others are still deliberating. The velocity principle teaches that timing isn't about waiting for the perfect moment. It's about being so well prepared that you can create the perfect moment through speed of action. Artifact: Grande Armée Supply Chain Manifests, detailed logistics documents showing how Napoleon fed and equipped massive armies. The supply manifests for my Russian campaign fill 3 leather-bound volumes and contain over 4,000 individual line items, everything from horseshoe nails to medical supplies, from ammunition to winter clothing. These documents represent my understanding that the most brilliant tactical genius is worthless if your soldiers cannot eat, your horses cannot be shod, and your cannons have no powder. I learned early that battles are won by logistics long before they're decided by tactics. Most military leaders see logistics as a necessary burden, something to be delegated to quartermasters, while they focus on the real work of strategy. I discovered that logistics is strategy. The army that can feed itself, equip itself, and sustain itself in any environment possesses an advantage that no tactical brilliance can overcome. My supply manifests became my most closely guarded secrets because they revealed exactly how I intended to operate in territories where enemies expected me to starve. The foundation of my logistical mastery was developed during the Italian campaigns, when I inherited an army that was literally falling apart from neglect. Soldiers were deserting because they hadn't been paid in months. Equipment was broken and unrepairable. Morale was non-existent because hungry men cannot maintain fighting spirit. I realized that before I could defeat external enemies, I had to solve the internal enemy of resource scarcity. My breakthrough came when I stopped thinking about logistics as support for military operations and started thinking about it as the primary military operation. Instead of planning battles and then figuring out how to supply them, I began planning supply operations and then designing battles around what was logistically sustainable. The Siege of Mantua demonstrates this principle perfectly. The Austrian fortress was considered impregnable, but my supply manifest revealed that I wasn't planning to take it by assault. I was planning to outlast it. While Austrian commanders focused on strengthening their defenses, I established supply lines that could sustain a siege indefinitely. I could afford to wait. They could not. Victory came not from superior firepower, but from superior preparation for extended operations. For the Russian campaign, my logistics preparation was the most comprehensive in military history. The supply manifests show that I had pre-positioned over 20 million rations across a network of depots stretching from Poland to Moscow. I had calculated exactly how many horses would be needed, how much fodder they would consume, what rate of equipment loss to expect, and how to maintain supply lines across vast distances. What the manifests don't show, because it was too sensitive to document, was my psychological understanding of logistics. I knew that well-supplied armies fight with confidence, while hungry armies fight with desperation. A soldier who knows his next meal is secured can focus entirely on victory. A soldier worried about supplies is already half defeated. My system required what I call logistical redundancy, multiple solutions for every supply challenge. If one depot was captured or destroyed, there were always alternatives. If one supply route was blocked, others remained operational. If one type of equipment failed, Substitutes were immediately available. This redundancy was expensive and complex, but it made my armies virtually unbeatable because they could sustain operations regardless of setbacks. The manifests also reveal my understanding of enemy logistics as a target. While my opponents focused on attacking my battle lines, I focused on destroying their supply capabilities. An army without ammunition cannot fight. An army without food cannot march. An army without medical supplies cannot maintain morale. By targeting enemy logistics while protecting my own, I could win campaigns without major battles. My most sophisticated logistical innovation was the concept of living off the land systematically, instead of randomly foraging, which destroys local resources and creates civilian hostility. I developed organized requisition systems that could extract maximum supplies while maintaining local cooperation. This required detailed advance intelligence about agricultural conditions, local storage capabilities, and political situations. These supply manifests represent thousands of hours of preparation that occurred long before any army marched. Victory was achieved in the planning rooms where we calculated exactly what would be needed and how to provide it, not on the battlefields where the results became visible. Artifact: Treaty of Campo Formio, the diplomatic agreement that showcased Napoleon's political maneuvering skills. The Treaty of Campo Formio, signed in my own hand in 1797, represents far more than a simple peace agreement between France and Austria. This document demonstrates my discovery that the greatest victories are achieved not by defeating enemies, but by transforming them into allies before conflicts even begin. The art of coalition building became my secret weapon for winning battles that were never fought. When I first took command of the Army of Italy, I faced not just military challenges, but a complex web of shifting European alliances. Austria, Britain, Russia, and various Italian states were all maneuvering against French interests, but they were also suspicious of each other. I realized that my greatest opportunity lay not in fighting all these enemies simultaneously, but in systematically isolating them by turning their suspicions into active divisions. The negotiations for Campo Formio revealed my approach to diplomatic warfare. While Austrian negotiators focused on territorial concessions and military limitations, I was orchestrating a much larger game. Every clause I proposed was designed not just to benefit France immediately, but to create conditions that would make future Austrian cooperation more attractive than continued resistance. I learned to study my potential allies and enemies with the same intensity I devoted to studying battlefields. Before every diplomatic engagement, I prepared detailed analyses of each party's true interests, their fears, their ambitions, and, most importantly, their internal pressures. The Austrian Empire, I discovered, was far more concerned about maintaining internal stability than about defeating France. By offering them territorial compensations that strengthened their internal position while weakening their external alliances, I transformed Austria from an implacable enemy into a reluctant partner. My coalition-building strategy operated on multiple levels simultaneously. At Campo Formio, I wasn't just negotiating with Austrian diplomats. I was sending carefully crafted messages to every other European power about the benefits of cooperation with France rather than continued resistance. The treaty terms were designed to demonstrate that alliance with Napoleon brought tangible rewards while opposition brought devastating consequences. The genius of this approach became clear during the subsequent Italian campaigns. Instead of facing the united opposition of multiple enemy coalitions, I found myself fighting isolated opponents while their former allies remained neutral or even provided indirect support. Austrian neutrality during my Egyptian campaign, Prussian hesitation during the War of the Second Coalition, Russian diplomatic communications, all of these resulted from the psychological impact of my coalition building rather than from military threats. I discovered that successful coalition building requires what I call asymmetric benefit creation. offering each potential ally something they value more than you value it, while receiving something you need more than they need it. At Campo Formio, Austria received territorial concessions in Venice that satisfied their immediate political needs, while I received recognition of French control over northern Italy that advanced my strategic objectives. Both sides gained what they most wanted, while sacrificing what they could afford to lose. The most sophisticated aspect of my diplomatic preparation was understanding the internal politics of potential allies and enemies. Austrian cooperation wasn't secured by threatening their armies. It was secured by demonstrating how alliance with France could solve their internal political problems. Prussian neutrality wasn't bought with gold. It was achieved by showing them how French expansion actually served their interests against their traditional rivals. My diplomatic correspondence from this period reveals the careful cultivation of personal relationships with key decision-makers. I wrote personally to emperors, kings, and ministers, not just about immediate political issues, but about their personal interests, their historical legacies, their domestic challenges. Coalition building succeeds when it addresses human motivations, not just political abstractions. The Treaty of Campo Formio established the template I would use throughout my career. Identify shared interests that transcend current conflicts, offer concrete benefits that address real needs, demonstrate the costs of continued opposition, and always leave opponents a dignified path toward cooperation. This approach allowed me to face enemies sequentially rather than simultaneously, often turning former opponents into future allies. Artifact: Revolutionary Artillery Positioning Manual, Napoleon's Innovations in Cannon Deployment and Battlefield. Technology. The Artillery Positioning Manual I developed during my early career contains diagrams and calculations that revolutionized how cannons were deployed on European battlefields. These technical drawings, marked with precise angles and mathematical formulas, represent my understanding that technological superiority comes not from having better equipment, but from using existing equipment in ways that enemies cannot anticipate or counter. My reputation as the god of war actually began with my mastery of artillery mathematics. While other officers saw cannons as simple tools for battering enemy positions, I saw them as precision instruments capable of creating decisive advantages through superior positioning and coordination. The manual contains innovations that gave me technological supremacy even when using identical equipment to my enemies. The breakthrough came during the Siege of Toulon in 1793, when I was still a young captain. The conventional approach to artillery placement focused on maximizing individual cannon effectiveness. I developed what I call concentrated fire doctrine, positioning multiple batteries to converge their fire on single target points, creating devastating effects that exceeded the sum of individual cannon power. My positioning manual reveals the mathematical principles behind this innovation. Instead of spreading artillery evenly along battle lines, I calculated optimal distances and angles for creating overlapping fields of fire. When enemies attacked what appeared to be lightly defended positions, they encountered concentrated artillery, fire from multiple directions simultaneously. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical damage. Armies simply couldn't maintain morale when facing such overwhelming firepower. But technological innovation extended far beyond. Artillery. My campaigns introduced systematic improvements in communication, reconnaissance, medical support, and equipment maintenance that gave my armies decisive operational advantages. The manual documents my development of standardized signals for battlefield communication, allowing coordinated movements that enemies couldn't disrupt or predict. During the Italian campaigns, I innovated rapid artillery deployment techniques that allowed my batteries to be repositioned and ready to fire in half the time required by Austrian forces. This wasn't achieved through better equipment, but through systematic training in standardized procedures. My artillery crews became so efficient that they could redeploy during battles, creating the illusion that I commanded far more cannons than actually existed. The most significant innovation was integrating artillery with infantry and cavalry in ways that European armies had never attempted. Traditional military doctrine treated these as separate forces that supported each other. I developed tactics that made them function as a single, coordinated weapon system. Infantry would fix enemy positions, artillery would devastate them, and cavalry would exploit the breakthrough, all happening with precision timing that overwhelmed traditional defensive approaches. My technical innovations also included systematic improvements in military engineering. The manual contains detailed specifications for rapid bridge construction, siege works, and defensive fortifications that could be completed faster and more effectively than anything enemies had previously encountered. At the Battle of Arcole, my engineers constructed a bridge under enemy fire using techniques I had developed specifically for such situations. Perhaps my most important technological insight was understanding that innovation's greatest value lies not in the technology itself, but in the tactical advantages it creates when enemies cannot respond effectively. My artillery positioning gave me decisive advantages, not because my cannons were superior, but because I was using them in ways that enemy commanders couldn't counter with their existing knowledge and training. The manual also documents my approach to technological adaptation, rapidly incorporating captured enemy equipment and techniques into my own forces while developing countermeasures for enemy innovations. This created a cycle of continuous technological superiority that kept my armies ahead of opponents who were always reacting to my previous innovations. My technological preparation extended to understanding enemy capabilities and limitations. I studied Austrian artillery doctrine, Prussian cavalry techniques, and Russian infantry formations not to copy them, but to develop innovative counters that would neutralize their advantages while maximizing my own. Artifact: false troop movement. Orders: fabricated military documents used to mislead enemy intelligence. Among my most carefully crafted documents are the false troop movement orders I deliberately allowed enemy spies to discover during the Austerlitz campaign. These fabricated papers, written in my own hand to ensure authenticity, contained detailed plans for a French retreat that would never occur. They represent my mastery of strategic deception, the art of making enemies believe exactly what you want them to believe while hiding your true intentions until the moment of decisive action. Learned the power of deception during my Egyptian campaign when I realized that controlling enemy perceptions was often more valuable than controlling territory. While my opponents focused on gathering intelligence about my actual positions and intentions, I focused on crafting the intelligence they would gather. By the time they discovered the truth, their decisions had already been made based on false assumptions. The false orders I prepared before Austerlitz were masterpieces of psychological manipulation. They described a French army that was demoralized, undersupplied, and desperately seeking to avoid confrontation with the superior Allied forces. They included realistic details about supply shortages, morale problems, and strategic concerns that would make any enemy commander confident about pressing forward with aggressive action. What made these deceptions effective wasn't their complexity, but their believability. I studied how enemy intelligence networks operated and crafted information that would naturally flow through their systems while appearing completely authentic. The false retreat orders were discovered by Austrian agents exactly where and when I intended, through channels that seemed accidental but were carefully orchestrated. The genius of strategic deception lies in understanding that enemies make their most important decisions based on what they believe to be true, not on what is actually true. At Austerlitz, the Allied commanders positioned their forces and committed to their battle plan based on their conviction that I was retreating. By the time they realized they had been deceived, They were already fully committed to positions that made their defeat inevitable. My approach to deception operated on multiple levels simultaneously. While false documents suggested retreat, my actual troop movements reinforced this impression by appearing defensive and hesitant. I deliberately weakened certain positions to make them appear vulnerable, while secretly reinforcing the areas where I intended to strike decisively. The deception succeeded because it was supported by consistent evidence across all channels. During the Italian campaigns, I perfected what I call calculated vulnerability, deliberately exposing apparent weaknesses that would encourage enemies to attack where I was actually strongest. Austrian commanders repeatedly committed their reserves to assault positions that appeared poorly defended, only to discover they were advancing into carefully prepared killing zones. The most sophisticated deceptions involved timing. I would allow enemies to discover accurate intelligence about my intentions, but only after it was too late for them to respond effectively. During the Ulm campaign, Austrian agents learned my true objectives just hours before my forces were already in position to execute them. Truth became a weapon when delivered at precisely the right moment. My false documents reveal the psychological principles behind effective deception. Enemies must believe they are discovering secrets rather than receiving information. The most convincing lies contain elements of uncomfortable truth. Deception succeeds when it confirms what enemies already want to believe about their own superiority or your weaknesses. Strategic deception requires understanding your opponent's decision-making process better than they understand it themselves. I studied how Austrian, Russian, and Prussian commanders gathered information, analyzed it, and reached conclusions. By understanding their mental processes, I could craft deceptions that would lead them to the exact conclusions I wanted them to reach. The ethical dimension of deception in warfare is clear, saving French lives by ending conflicts quickly through superior strategy rather than prolonged bloodshed. In competitive situations outside warfare, the principle applies to misdirection rather than outright falsehood, allowing competitors to draw incorrect conclusions while focusing their attention away from your actual strategic advantages. Artifact: multi-route campaign maps, battle plans showing multiple strategic options for single campaigns. The campaign maps I prepared for the invasion of Austria contain not one battle plan, but 7 distinct strategic options, each marked in different colored ink and complete with detailed logistics, timing, and contingency responses. These maps represent my understanding that true preparation means being ready for every possible scenario, not just the one you hope will occur. Victory comes to commanders who can adapt instantly when circumstances change, because they have already prepared for those changes. My approach to contingency planning was born from a painful lesson during my first independent command in Italy. I had developed what I considered a perfect battle plan for engaging the Austrians at Montenotte. But when we arrived, the enemy had positioned themselves completely differently than my intelligence had suggested. While my officers panicked about our ruined strategy, I realized that the problem wasn't unexpected circumstances, it was my failure to prepare for them. From that moment forward, I never developed single plans. Every campaign involved what I call parallel preparation, simultaneously developing multiple complete strategies for achieving the same objective through different means. My multi-route maps show how the same strategic goal could be accomplished through direct assault, flanking maneuvers, siege tactics, or even diplomatic pressure, depending on how situations actually developed. The genius of this approach became clear during the Jena-Auerstedt campaign when Prussian forces appeared in positions that contradicted all my intelligence reports. Instead of desperately improvising new plans, I simply activated contingency option 4 from my prepared alternatives. My marshals executed movements they had already rehearsed, using supply lines that were already established toward objectives that were already clearly defined. My contingency maps reveal the mathematical precision behind this preparation. For every major decision point in a campaign, I calculated the probability of various enemy responses and prepared detailed plans for each possibility. If enemies retreated, I had pursuit plans ready. If they advanced, I had defensive positions prepared. If they attempted to outflank us, I had counter-flanking movements ready to execute immediately. This preparation extended beyond purely military considerations to include political, economic, and even weather contingencies. My maps for the Russian campaign included alternative routes for different seasonal conditions, backup supply strategies if primary depots were compromised, and even diplomatic protocols for various political scenarios that might develop with Russian nobles or allied nations. The most sophisticated aspect of my contingency planning was what I call cascade preparation, understanding how initial changes would create secondary and tertiary effects that would require further adaptations. If Plan A failed and we switched to Plan B, what new vulnerabilities would that create? What opportunities would emerge? What additional resources would be needed? My maps show these cascade effects mapped out in advance. During the Egyptian campaign, my contingency planning proved decisive when British naval forces cut off my expected supply lines. Instead of being trapped, I activated a pre-planned alternative strategy that transformed the campaign from a quick conquest into a sustained occupation. The failure of my primary plan became the success of my secondary plan because both had been prepared with equal thoroughness. My staff officers initially resisted this approach because it required enormous amounts of additional preparation time. They argued that preparing for unlikely scenarios was wasteful when we could focus entirely on perfecting the most probable strategy. I learned to demonstrate the value of contingency planning by showing them how many of my greatest victories had actually resulted from executing backup plans rather than primary strategies. The maps also reveal my understanding that contingency planning provides psychological advantages beyond practical benefits. Commanders who have prepared for multiple scenarios maintain confidence and decision-making clarity even when circumstances become chaotic. Troops who see their leadership adapting smoothly to unexpected developments maintain morale and fighting effectiveness. My approach to contingencies taught me that preparation isn't about predicting the future. It's about being ready for multiple possible futures. The commander who prepares for only one scenario is at the mercy of circumstances. The commander who prepares for multiple scenarios controls circumstances by having responses ready regardless of how events unfold. Artifact, motivational speech, notes to the old guard. Napoleon's personal notes for inspiring troops before major battles. The speech notes I prepared before addressing my old guard at Waterloo contain more than just inspiring words. They reveal my understanding that true leadership authority comes from visible, meticulous preparation that demonstrates to followers that their commander has considered every detail of their welfare and success. These handwritten notes show how preparation becomes the foundation of trust, and trust becomes the foundation of extraordinary performance. I learned early in my career that soldiers will follow officers they trust, but they will die for officers they believe have prepared thoroughly for their success and survival. My speech notes weren't written to manipulate emotions. They were written to communicate the depth of preparation I had undertaken on behalf of every man under my command. Before every major engagement, I spent days crafting speeches that would demonstrate specific knowledge of the challenges my troops would face and the detailed preparations I had made to overcome them. At Austerlitz, my pre-battle address wasn't about glory or patriotism. It was about showing my soldiers that I knew exactly where every enemy battery was positioned, how we would neutralize each threat, and why our preparation made victory inevitable. My notes reveal the systematic approach I developed for preparation-based leadership. First, I would document every aspect of preparation that affected my troops directly: supply arrangements, medical preparations, equipment readiness, tactical support plans. Then I would craft language that communicated this preparation in terms that demonstrated my personal investment in their success. The most powerful leadership moments came when I could demonstrate preparation that my subordinates hadn't even considered necessary. During the Italian campaigns, my troops discovered that I had arranged for their wounded to receive better medical care than they had ever experienced, that their equipment had been maintained to standards higher than regulation required, and that their families were receiving support they hadn't expected. This preparation created what I call leadership multiplication, when troops perform beyond their natural capabilities because they trust their commander's preparation completely. At the Battle of Arcole, my soldiers charged across a bridge under devastating enemy fire, not because I ordered them to, but because my preparation had convinced them that I had found a way to make the impossible possible. My speech notes show how I learned to translate complex strategic preparation into simple, understandable terms that built confidence. Instead of explaining the intricate logistics that ensured adequate ammunition, I would tell my troops, every man will have enough powder to win his personal victory. Instead of detailing intelligence networks, I would say, we know our enemies better than they know themselves. The preparation behind leadership extended beyond military concerns to understanding the personal motivations of individual soldiers. My notes contain references to specific regiments, their recent experiences, their particular strengths, and their concerns. This personalized preparation allowed me to speak directly to what each unit needed to hear to perform at maximum effectiveness. During the Egyptian campaign, my leadership preparation included studying Islamic culture and history so I could communicate respect for local traditions while maintaining military discipline. My speech notes from that period show how cultural preparation enhanced my authority with both French troops and Egyptian allies. The most sophisticated aspect of my leadership preparation was what I call anticipatory problem-solving, identifying potential morale, discipline, or performance problems before they occurred, and preparing solutions that could be implemented immediately. My notes contain contingency speeches for various scenarios, setbacks, unexpected enemy actions, supply problems, even weather challenges. This preparation allowed me to maintain leadership authority during the most difficult moments. When unexpected problems arose, my immediate confident response demonstrated that I had anticipated the difficulty and prepared solutions. Troops who might have panicked under unprepared leadership instead maintained confidence because they saw their commander adapting smoothly to circumstances he had obviously considered in advance. My speech notes reveal that the most inspiring leadership comes from demonstrating that you have prepared more thoroughly for your followers' success than they have prepared for it themselves. When people see that level of personal investment in their welfare, they respond with loyalty and effort that exceeds what any amount of charisma could generate. Artifact, Continental System Economic Decrees, documents outlining Napoleon's economic blockade against Britain. The Continental System decrees I issued beginning in 1806 represent my understanding that the greatest victories are achieved not through destroying enemy armies, but through making continued resistance economically impossible. These documents, signed with the full authority of the French Empire, reveal my strategy of winning through economic preparation, systematically undermining enemy financial foundations while strengthening my own until military conflict becomes unnecessary. I developed this approach after studying how Britain had used economic warfare against every continental power for decades. While European armies focused on territorial conquest, British strategy centered on economic strangulation. I realized that to defeat Britain permanently, I needed to turn their own weapons against them with superior preparation and broader scope. The genius of the Continental System wasn't the blockade itself, but the comprehensive economic preparation that made it sustainable. Before issuing the decrees, I spent months preparing alternative trade networks, substitute supply sources, and economic relationships that would allow continental Europe to prosper without British goods. While my enemies saw only the restrictions, I had prepared the entire infrastructure for economic independence. My economic decrees reveal the systematic thinking behind this strategy. Instead of simply prohibiting British trade, I created positive incentives for European merchants to develop new commercial relationships that served French strategic interests. Italian silk producers found new markets in Russia. German manufacturers discovered opportunities in Polish territories. French wine and luxury goods replaced British products across the continent. The preparation phase involved what I call economic intelligence, understanding British financial vulnerabilities better than British leaders understood them themselves. My agents reported on British grain imports, colonial revenue streams, manufacturing dependencies, and credit relationships. I discovered that British economic strength was actually British economic vulnerability when properly exploited. During the Tilsit negotiations with the Tsar Alexander, my economic preparation allowed me to offer Russia concrete benefits from joining the continental system rather than merely threatening consequences for refusal. I had prepared detailed analyses showing how exclusion of British goods would increase demand for Russian timber, grain, and naval supplies across Europe. Economic alliance became more attractive than continued neutrality. The most sophisticated aspect of my economic warfare was understanding the psychological impact of financial pressure on enemy decision-making. British merchants and manufacturers began pressuring their government for peace not because of military defeats, but because of systematic erosion of their profit margins and market access. Economic preparation created political pressure that military campaigns alone could never achieve. My decrees also established what I call economic contingency planning, preparing for British countermeasures and developing responses in advance. When Britain attempted to circumvent the blockade through neutral shipping, I had already prepared diplomatic and legal frameworks for extending the system. When they offered economic incentives to potential allies, I had prepared superior counteroffers. The continental system demonstrated that economic preparation requires understanding global interconnections, not just bilateral relationships. British economic weakness created opportunities for French economic strength, but only when I had prepared the infrastructure to exploit those opportunities immediately. Military conquest became sustainable only when supported by economic preparation that could outlast temporary political arrangements. My economic warfare extended beyond the continental system to include systematic exploitation of enemy financial resources through contributions, indemnities, and strategic control of trade routes. The key insight was that armies require funding, and funding requires economic preparation that most military leaders neglect until financial crisis forces desperate measures. The ultimate lesson of my economic strategy was that financial warfare succeeds when it offers positive alternatives rather than merely imposing restrictions. Nations joined the continental system not just to avoid French military pressure, but because I had prepared economic opportunities that made cooperation more profitable than resistance. This principle applies beyond international relations to any competitive environment where economic leverage can be developed through superior preparation, broader thinking, and systematic exploitation of opponent vulnerabilities while strengthening your own financial position. Artifact: Retreat from Moscow, Strategic Analysis, Napoleon's personal review of what went wrong, and lessons learned. The strategic analysis I wrote during my retreat from Moscow contains the most honest assessment of preparation failure in my entire career. These pages, stained with the reality of one of history's greatest military disasters, reveal my understanding that defeats teach more valuable lessons about preparation than victories ever can. The Russian campaign showed me the limits of even the most meticulous planning and the importance of preparing for the possibility that your best preparations may prove insufficient. I had prepared for the Russian campaign more thoroughly than any military operation in history. My logistics planning was unprecedented. My intelligence gathering was comprehensive. My tactical preparations were exhaustive. Yet I learned that perfect preparation for the wrong assumptions leads to perfect failure. The campaign failed not because I hadn't prepared, but because I had prepared for a different war than the one Russia was willing to fight. My analysis reveals the fundamental error in my strategic thinking. I had prepared for a campaign against the Russian army, but Russia chose to fight a campaign against French logistics. While I planned for decisive battles that would force political resolution, Russian strategy focused on avoiding decisive battles while systematically destroying my ability to sustain operations. My preparation was magnificent, but it was preparation for the wrong contest. The retreat documents show how I learned to extract wisdom from catastrophe. Instead of blaming subordinates, weather, or bad luck, I systematically analyzed every aspect of my preparation to understand which assumptions had been flawed and which methods had proven inadequate. This honest self-assessment became the foundation for improved preparation in future campaigns. The most painful lesson was understanding how over-preparation in one area can create dangerous vulnerabilities in others. My massive supply trains, prepared to sustain the army across vast distances, became liabilities when Russian tactics focused on mobility and scorched earth policies. The very thoroughness of my logistical preparation made rapid movement impossible when circumstances required abandoning prepared positions. My retreat analysis documents the discovery that preparation must include preparing to abandon preparation when circumstances change fundamentally. The commanders who survived the Russian winter were those who could quickly adapt to completely different operational requirements, discarding elaborate plans that were no longer relevant, while improvising solutions for challenges no amount of advanced planning could have anticipated. During the horrible weeks of retreat, I learned that the ultimate test of leadership isn't executing perfect preparations, but maintaining effectiveness when all preparations have failed. The officers who preserved their units through the disaster were those who could inspire confidence and maintain discipline, even when it was obvious that our strategic preparation had been inadequate for the reality we faced. My analysis reveals how defeat can improve future preparation if you extract the right lessons. The Russian campaign taught me to prepare for enemy strategies that deliberately avoided my strengths rather than challenging them directly. I learned to include preparation abandonment protocols in future plans, predetermined criteria for recognizing when circumstances had changed so fundamentally that existing preparations were counterproductive. The retreat also demonstrated the importance of psychological preparation for failure. My troops, who maintained morale and fighting effectiveness during the disaster, were those who had been mentally prepared for setbacks and trained to maintain unit cohesion regardless of strategic outcomes. Physical preparation alone was insufficient when the psychological challenge exceeded all expectations. Perhaps the most valuable insight from my strategic analysis was understanding that preparation includes preparing your mind to learn from failures rather than being destroyed by them. The difference between leaders who recover from defeats and those who are permanently damaged lies not in avoiding failure, but in extracting wisdom that improves future preparation. My retreat analysis concludes with a recognition that became central to my later strategic thinking. The best preparation includes preparing for the possibility that your preparation will prove inadequate and developing the mental flexibility to adapt when even your best efforts encounter circumstances beyond your control or prediction. Artifact: Elba Escape Plan Documents. Secret preparations for Napoleon's return from exile. The escape plan I developed during my exile on Elba represents the ultimate test of preparation under extreme constraints, returning from political death to reclaim an empire with virtually no resources, no allies, and enemies controlling every advantage. These secret documents, hidden in my personal quarters and written in coded language, reveal how preparation principles can create possibilities even when circumstances appear hopeless. My situation on Elba seemed to offer no realistic chance of return. I commanded a guard of 400 men on a tiny island, while the combined powers of Europe controlled France with armies numbering in the hundreds of thousands. Traditional strategic thinking would suggest that any attempt at comeback was pure fantasy. Instead, I spent 11 months preparing for what others considered impossible, because I understood that thorough preparation can transform impossible into inevitable. The escape documents reveal my systematic approach to preparation under pressure. First, I analyzed what resources I actually controlled rather than lamenting what I had lost. While my enemies saw a defeated emperor on a remote island, I saw a strategic position from which I could gather intelligence, communicate with supporters, and prepare for opportunities that others couldn't anticipate. My intelligence network, though reduced, remained operational through loyal agents throughout France who continued providing information about political developments, military dispositions, and, most importantly, popular sentiment. The documents show how I used this intelligence to identify the precise moment when conditions would be most favorable for return, when war weariness and economic problems had undermined confidence in the restored monarchy. The genius of my Elba. Preparation was understanding that my greatest advantage lay not in military force, but in the psychological impact of my return itself. I prepared not for a military campaign, but for a political resurrection that would transform the strategic landscape through its sheer audacity. While my enemies prepared for conventional threats, I prepared for something they considered impossible. My escape plans required what I call minimum viable preparation, identifying the smallest set of resources and actions that could create maximum impact. Instead of attempting to recreate my former massive military machine, I prepared for a lightning campaign that would succeed through speed, surprise, and the psychological momentum of seemingly miraculous return. The documents reveal my analysis of French political psychology during my absence. I discovered that nostalgia for imperial glory was growing stronger than satisfaction with restored monarchy. My preparation focused on positioning my return to capitalize on this sentiment, while my enemies remained focused on preventing traditional military threats that I had no intention of pursuing. During the 100 Days campaign itself, my preparation under pressure created what seemed like military miracles. At Ligny, I defeated Prussian forces with an army hastily assembled from veterans and volunteers. At Quatre Bras, I nearly destroyed Wellington's advance force. These successes came not from superior numbers or equipment, but from preparation that had maximized every available advantage while enemies struggled to adapt to circumstances they hadn't anticipated. The Waterloo campaign demonstrated both the power and limits of pressure preparation. My strategic preparation succeeded in dividing enemy forces and creating opportunities for decisive victory. However, the tactical execution required more time and resources than my accelerated timeline could provide. Victory came within hours of achievement, falling short not because of preparation failures, but because the margin for error under extreme pressure is always razor thin. My Elba documents conclude with an insight that applies to any situation where preparation must occur. Under severe constraints, focus on creating momentum rather than perfect conditions. When you cannot prepare for ideal circumstances, prepare to create favorable circumstances through actions that transform the strategic environment itself. The 100 Days prove that thorough preparation, even under the most limiting conditions, can create possibilities that appear impossible to those who measure only conventional resources and ignore the power of strategic thinking, timing, and psychological impact. Artifact: Napoleon's Strategic Maxims collection, his compiled wisdom on military strategy and preparation. The collection of strategic maxims I compiled during my exile on St. Helena represents the distillation of 25 years of preparation-based victories and defeats into principles that transcend any particular battle or campaign. These maxims, written as my final gift to future generations of leaders, reveal how the art of winning before the battle begins becomes timeless wisdom that applies far beyond military conquest. My maxims weren't written as abstract philosophical statements, but as practical guides drawn from specific experiences where preparation determined outcomes. An army marches on its stomach emerged from my discovery that logistics preparation matters more than tactical brilliance. I may lose a battle, but I shall never lose a minute, came from understanding that time is the most precious resource in any competitive situation. The wisdom I've tried to preserve in these maxims is that preparation is never about the specific techniques. It's about the thinking process that generates effective preparation for any challenge. The same mental approach that allowed me to conquer Europe can be applied to conquering any obstacle, because the fundamental principles of strategic thinking remain constant even when circumstances change completely. My strategic legacy lies not in the specific tactics I used against Austrian or Russian armies, but in demonstrating that thorough preparation combined with rapid execution can overcome almost any disadvantage. Future leaders who understand this principle will find ways to apply it using tools and methods I never imagined, facing challenges I never encountered. The maxims reveal my understanding that strategic thinking is ultimately about seeing possibilities that others miss and preparing to exploit those possibilities while opponents remain focused on obvious conventional approaches. Whether commanding armies or building businesses, the leader who sees the larger pattern and prepares accordingly holds decisive advantages over those who react to immediate circumstances. From my campaigns, I extracted principles about information gathering, resource allocation, timing, coalition building, and psychological preparation that apply to any competitive environment. The specific applications change, but the underlying strategic thinking remains as relevant today as it was when I used it to reshape the map of Europe. My greatest strategic insight, preserved in these maxims, is that victory goes to those who can think systematically about preparation while others think randomly about tactics. The leader who prepares comprehensively while enemies prepare partially will win regardless of starting advantages or disadvantages. The legacy I most want to preserve is the understanding that strategic thinking is not a natural talent reserved for military genius. It's a learnable skill that improves with systematic practice. Every principle I developed was learned through experience, analysis, and constant refinement of preparation methods. My maxims demonstrate that strategic preparation creates compound advantages. Each element of thorough preparation, intelligence, logistics, timing, psychology, reinforces every other element. The leader who masters this compound effect becomes nearly unbeatable because opponents must overcome not single advantages, but interconnected systems of advantages. The timeless nature of strategic thinking means that the same principles that allowed me to coordinate the movements of 500,000 men across Europe can be applied to coordinating any complex undertaking. Scale changes, but the fundamental requirements for success through preparation remain constant. My strategic legacy teaches that the art of winning before the battle begins is ultimately about developing a different relationship with uncertainty and competition. Instead of hoping circumstances will favor you, you learn to create circumstances that must favor you through superior preparation. The maxims conclude with my most important insight. Strategic thinking transforms leaders from people who react to events into people who create events. This transformation is available to anyone willing to commit to systematic preparation and comprehensive strategic thinking. Artifact: contemporary business strategy frameworks, modern tools that echo Napoleonic strategic principles. The business strategy frameworks that dominate today's competitive landscape: scenario planning, competitive intelligence, rapid prototyping, agile methodology, are direct descendants of the preparation principles I developed for military campaigns 2 centuries ago. These modern tools prove that the art of winning before the battle begins remains as relevant in corporate boardrooms as it was on European battlefields. When I study how today's most successful leaders approach business competition, I see the same fundamental patterns that guided my campaigns. They gather superior intelligence about competitors and market conditions. They prepare for multiple scenarios while competitors focus on single strategies. They move faster than opponents expect. They build coalitions and partnerships that isolate rivals. Most importantly, they win through preparation rather than hoping for favorable circumstances. The modern business equivalent of my intelligence networks is what contemporary leaders call competitive intelligence and market research. Companies that succeed systematically gather information about competitor strategies, customer preferences, technological developments, and regulatory changes. Like my spy networks across Europe, these intelligence systems provide decisive advantages to leaders who use information more effectively than rivals. Today's supply chain management directly applies the logistics principles I developed for feeding and equipping armies across hostile territory. Companies that dominate their markets do so by preparing distribution systems, inventory management, and supplier relationships that allow them to serve customers more efficiently than competitors. The same systematic thinking that kept my armies supplied now keeps store shelves stocked and customers satisfied. Modern project management methodology reflects my approach to campaign planning with multiple contingencies and rapid adaptation to changing circumstances. Successful business leaders prepare for various market scenarios, competitive responses, and technological disruptions while maintaining flexibility to execute quickly when opportunities arise. The agility that allowed me to outmaneuver Austrian and Russian armies now allows companies to outmaneuver slower competitors. The venture capital and startup ecosystem operates on principles I pioneered for coalition building and resource allocation. Successful entrepreneurs prepare comprehensive business plans that attract investors and partners while isolating competitive threats. They build networks of supporters who provide resources, expertise, and market access. The same strategic thinking that created the continental system now creates business ecosystems that dominate entire industries. In personal career development, my preparation principles translate directly to professional success. The individual who gathers superior information about industry trends develops multiple skills for various scenarios, builds strategic relationships across their field, and moves faster than colleagues when opportunities arise, will advance regardless of starting advantages. My approach to technological innovation finds expression in today's research and development strategies. Companies that maintain competitive advantages do so by systematically developing innovations that competitors cannot quickly copy or counter. The same thinking that gave me artillery superiority now gives technology companies platform advantages that dominate markets. The financial warfare principles I used against Britain through the continental system now appear in corporate strategy, as market positioning, price competition, and strategic partnerships that isolate competitors from key resources or customer segments. Modern businesses win by controlling economic leverage points rather than simply competing on obvious metrics. Even my deception tactics find legitimate expression in business through strategic misdirection, competitive positioning, and marketing that shapes how customers and competitors perceive market dynamics. The art of making competitors believe what you want them to believe while hiding your true strategic intentions remains as valuable in business as it was in warfare. The psychological preparation that enabled me to maintain confidence under extreme pressure now appears in leadership development, crisis management, and organizational resilience training. Leaders who prepare mentally for various scenarios, setbacks, and unexpected challenges maintain effectiveness when others become paralyzed by uncertainty. The key insight that connects my military experience to modern competition is that winning through preparation requires systematic thinking about complex challenges rather than hoping for simple solutions. Whether conquering Europe or conquering markets, success goes to those who prepare more thoroughly than opponents thought necessary. Artifact, Personal Strategic Planning Template, a framework for applying Napoleon's principles to individual goals. The strategic planning template I would create for you today contains the same elements that guided my conquest of Europe, adapted for your personal campaign of achievement. This framework transforms the art of winning before the battle begins from historical inspiration into practical methodology that you can implement immediately to gain decisive advantages in any area of your life. Begin with intelligence gathering about your competitive environment. Just as I studied every enemy commander's personality and capabilities, you must systematically understand the landscape where you intend to succeed. Who controls the resources you need? What are their motivations, fears, and decision-making? Patterns? What information do they lack that you can obtain? Your personal intelligence network should include mentors, industry contacts, and information sources that provide insights your competitors don't possess. Develop your personal logistics system, the infrastructure that sustains your advancement toward objectives. My armies succeeded because I prepared supply lines before beginning campaigns. Your supply lines include financial resources, skill development, professional relationships, and support systems that enable sustained effort toward your goals. Prepare these foundations before you need them, not after opportunities arise. Create multiple strategic options for achieving your objectives, just as my campaign maps showed various routes to the same destination. Identify the conventional path everyone expects, then prepare alternative approaches that exploit opportunities others won't see. When your primary strategy encounters obstacles, you'll have backup plans ready for immediate execution rather than stopping to develop new approaches. Build your coalition of supporters and allies systematically. I transformed enemies into partners by understanding their true interests and offering benefits they valued more than continued opposition. Identify the people whose cooperation accelerates your progress. Understand what they need and position yourself as someone whose success benefits them. Create relationships before you need them. Develop superior capabilities in areas that matter most for your objectives. My artillery innovations gave me decisive advantages because I prepared better. Systems than enemies could counter quickly. Choose specific skills, knowledge areas, or capabilities where you can achieve clear superiority through focused preparation. Then leverage those advantages across multiple opportunities. Master the psychology of preparation by visualizing success, scenarios in detail, while mentally rehearsing responses to setbacks and challenges. Build the unshakable confidence that comes from having considered every likely scenario and prepared responses for each. This mental preparation ensures you'll maintain effectiveness under pressure when others become reactive. Implement velocity principles by developing systems that allow you to recognize and respond to opportunities faster than competitors. Prepare standardized processes for common decisions so you can move quickly when timing matters. Create what I call preparation velocity, the ability to get ready for unexpected opportunities in minimum time. Your personal campaign requires the same systematic thinking that guided my military campaigns. Define your strategic objectives clearly. Analyze the competitive environment thoroughly. Prepare multiple approaches for achieving your goals. Build the coalition and capabilities needed for success. Execute with speed when opportunities arise. The art of winning before the battle begins transforms from military strategy into life strategy when you commit to systematic preparation rather than hoping circumstances will favor you. Every principle I use to reshape Europe can be applied to reshaping your own destiny through superior strategic thinking and comprehensive preparation. Begin today. Choose one area where you want to achieve breakthrough results. Then apply these preparation principles systematically. Victory will come not from hoping you'll succeed, but from making success inevitable through preparation that exceeds what your competition thought necessary. The empire you build through strategic thinking will be your legacy, just as mine has endured long after the armies have been forgotten.